So going into the game against Aston Villa, if I was Erik ten Hag, this is how I would set up the United side. And from the first image, it looks pretty standard to what we would usually expect to see from United. However, I'm going to be explaining some unorthodox patterns of movements, which I think could work to exploit Aston Villa defensively, specifically their high back line, as well as their narrow defensive shape. And so whilst it would start as what could be a 3-3-4 kind of shape, maybe a 2-4-4 depending on the positioning of Dalot and Shaw the fullbacks, my theory is that because Aston Villa are going to use such a high back line and really compress the space between the lines, it's basically pointless having Bruno Fernandes sitting behind the midfield line. And I actually think by using Bruno Fernandes in a different way in this specific game can actually work to allow United to exploit that high line and allow Marcus Rashford and Alejandro Garnacho to get in behind the Villa back line into goal scoring positions in a way that Arteta wasn't able to do with Martinelli and Saka. But before I come on to the tactical analysis, what do you think of the new Manchester United jersey for next season that was apparently leaked? I'm not sure if it is going to be the official one, who really knows, but the style of the shirt is giving me very much that early 2000s Vodafone Manchester United shirt. And if you like me are a fan of the old Manchester United jerseys, head over to Jersey FIFA. They've got all the retro Manchester United jerseys from the 90s and 2000s, as well as from other clubs and international sides as well. If you use code Atlantis at checkout, you'll get a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which I will leave linked in the description. So when United first have possession in the middle third, you can expect Aston Villa to sit off in a narrow 4-4-2 shape, with the wide midfielders sitting incredibly narrow, and as usual, Unai Emery is going to push his back line high up the pitch, compressing the space between the defensive and the midfield lines. And so what you'd probably expect to see from United is Hojlund, Rashford and Garnacho, the front three, as well as Bruno Fernandes, all trying to break in behind the Villa back line, and United looking to play those long balls over, releasing them in behind. But I personally wouldn't adopt this approach, and I actually realised this whilst rewatching the Arsenal-Aston Villa game from a few months ago. And this is because when United have possession in the middle third, because that Villa back line is so high, you often see Kamara dropping into the back line with the responsibility of tracking the run from that player in the half space, which he did incredibly well throughout the Arsenal game against Kai Havertz. As with Saka and Martinelli retaining high and wide positions, it was up to the German to break into those central positions, and because the movement from Havertz was really just vertical and he doesn't have the pace to get away from Kamara found it quite easy to just follow Havertz when he dropped into the half space and track that run in behind. And so in my opinion, if you use Bruno Fernandes in this way, sitting in the left-sided half space and trying to break him in behind the back line, you're going to have the same issue that Arsenal had, because Bruno Fernandes, like Havertz, doesn't really have the pace to break away from the Villa back line. And with him starting in that left-sided half space where Kamara is already positioned, it's going to be pretty simple for the Villa holding midfielder to just constantly be checking his shoulder and ready to track that run when Bruno Fernandes looks to make it. And so in my opinion, rather than having Bruno Fernandes make this run, you really want either Rashford from the left or Garnacho from the right to be making these runs from central positions, because they've got the acceleration to burst away from the Villa back line, as well as the finishing ability to be able to take these 1v1 opportunities when they come. And so if I was in charge of setting up United tactically for this game against Aston Villa, I would look to use some positional rotation in order to get Rashford and Garnacho in these sorts of positions, and this is how I would do it. So first of all, if you're going to have Garnacho and Rashford making these runs from the half space, you don't want them starting too wide, because even if they are able to break in behind with diagonal runs from these sorts of wide positions, they're not going to be getting in high XG goal scoring positions, and the majority of the time they're probably going to be breaking into crossing positions, which certainly isn't a problem, but ideally you'd want them to be getting in these 1v1 positions just because there's a higher probability of scoring. And so the way I would do this is by using Bruno Fernandes' position in order to drag Boubacar Kamara high up the pitch. Unai Emery often instructs Kamara to follow that player who sits in the left-sided half space, and so what I would do is have Casemiro drop into the back line, allow Luke Shaw to push forward to retain the width, and have Bruno Fernandes, rather than sitting between the lines where the space is going to be congested anyway, have him instead drop in front of the Villa midfield line in order to drag Kamara higher up the pitch and create that space in the half space for them Rashford to drift into. And also, by dropping Casemiro into the back three, you still get that wide base, allowing you to circulate the ball around Villa's front two, with either Kobbie Mainoo playing as a single pivot at times or playing in a double pivot with Bruno Fernandes, but it also gives you that defensive security to then push both Dalot and Luke Shaw forward, taking the burden of keeping the width in the system off of Rashford and Garnacho and allowing them to drift into central positions. And the other benefit of using Luke Shaw and Dalot in these wide positions is they can drop deep along the flank, into positions where the fullbacks of Villa can't really push out to close them down because they'll leave such a big space. And because Unai Emery is going to be using that narrow midfield 4, the wide midfielders aren't going to be in these wide positions either. And so when the ball's being circulated across that back line, United should always have a free pass out to either Dalot or Shaw, who can just drop deep along that flank and receive the ball where the fullbacks aren't going to come out and press them. If they sit higher up the pitch, as soon as they receive the ball, the fullbacks can come out, Kamara can drop into the back line. And so rather than having Rashford and Garnacho sitting high and wide, by using Luke Shaw and Dalot in these slightly deeper positions on the flanks, it's going to cause the wide midfielders and fullbacks for Aston Villa some positional dilemmas as to whether they drop out to cover that space out wide and leave space between them and the centre back, or between them and the central midfielders if it's the wide midfielders. But alternatively, if they do what I think they would do, which is retain those narrow positions, you've now got Luke Shaw and Dalot who are constantly going to be available on the flanks for either Maguire or Casemiro to shift the ball out to, as well as the opportunity for one of the backline or midfielders to switch play quickly, which will then enable them to take advantage of that space by driving forward up the pitch. But just quickly, before I go any further, if you do want to see some more content, you can sign up to my Patreon for a 7-day free trial. I have just released a podcast episode talking about Omar Barada and how I think he can use his experience from Manchester City at Manchester United and Dave Brailsford going through his marginal gains theory, talking about how he took British cycling from basically winning nothing in a century to dominating the sport for the best part of a decade. I've also got some unreleased tactical episodes as well, and I will be releasing any unreleased videos that I plan to release on this channel that I didn't think quite fit what I was doing at the time. So check my Patreon out, it will be linked in the description, and you can get a 7-day free trial. And so the combination of Bruno Fernandes' deeper positioning in front of the Villa midfield line and Luke Shaw's high and wide position is going to work in tandem to drag Boubacar Kamara higher up the pitch, but also pull Matty Cash the right back into a slightly wider position as well, meaning that should open up the half space for Rashford to not only sit in but also make those diagonal runs into. And the reason I think Rashford's run from the half space will be the most effective way of getting in behind the Villa back line is because when the ball goes across the back line or into one of the deeper United players who's then going to look to actually play that ball in behind, Rashford's actually going to be starting a few yards in front of the Villa back line rather than on the shoulder. And whilst this usually would be considered a bit counterintuitive, against Unai Emery's offside trap, I think this is the most effective way of actually breaking in behind. And we can see an example of why against Everton. Here we see Jared Braithwaite has the ball, and as he's about to play this long ball in behind the Villa back line, you can see that because Doucouré has started his run on the shoulder of the Villa back line, when he actually makes that run, Villa can simply step up and catch him offside. And so in order to beat this offside trap, you can't really do so in the conventional manner of starting high and making the run from the shoulder of the last defender, because the Villa defenders are just too well organised and they can step up at any time, and this is why opposition sides have recorded the most offsides when they have played Aston Villa in the whole Premier League this season. If you try to bend or check your run from a higher position, you simply end up cancelling your own momentum and it becomes hard to even get to the ball in the first place. So by starting from a deeper position, you've got that few yards to actually gain your forward momentum. As you're moving forward, the Villa backline are moving back, and you should be able to time your run a lot better, with Rashford making his run a few yards in front of the Villa backline when one of the deeper United players are actually connecting with the ball, meaning that when the long ball does arrive over the Villa backline into that space in behind, because it's Rashford not Bruno Fernandes making the run from the half space, he should have the pace to get onto the ball despite conceding the first few yards to the Villa backline and then be able to finish from the 1v1 opportunity, and the same goes for Garnacho on the right side as well. But another way that United could exploit Villa's narrow 4-4-2 is by keeping Rashford and Garnacho high and wide in some circumstances and utilising quick switches of play in order to create overloads down the flanks and isolate the Villa fullbacks in 2v1 situations. See, when the ball is on one side of the pitch, in this example it's on the right, the Villa wide midfielder on the opposite side is going to tuck in to retain that narrow shape. And so if you can then have the United fullback in some circumstances holding a wider position on the far side, you can then look to play the ball back to one of United's deeper players, Harry Maguire, Kobe Mainoo for example, if the ball's on the right side, and have them switch play quickly with a long pass out to the far side, allowing the United fullback, in this example Luke Shaw, to receive the ball, play the ball upfield into Rashford, who should be holding an advanced position, and because the Villa wide midfielder on that side, Leon Bailey in this example, because he's holding a narrow position when the ball's on the far side, The majority of the time he's not going to be able to make up that distance in order to track the overlapping run of Luke Shaw. And as we saw against Wolves last week, United with Dalot and Shaw providing those overlapping runs can be incredibly effective, specifically on the left side where Rashford and Shaw link up very well, and if Rashford can get the timing and the weight of the pass down the side of the fullback correct. Luke Shaw should be able to get into these dangerous low crossing positions, whereas he did for Rasmus Hojlund's goal against Wolves, play the ball across the 6-yard box, or if he's closer to the byline he can look to cut the ball back to the likes of Bruno Fernandes, arriving late on the edge of the box. But another consequence of Aston Villa using that narrow midfield 4 where the wide midfielder on the opposite side holds a narrow position to cover the space centrally is that Aston Villa's fullback on the far side is often left vulnerable to an overload. And United could exploit this by pushing the fullbacks forward, meaning that when the ball is on the far side with Hojlund looking to get towards the 6-yard box, dragging one or both centre backs towards goal, Ten Hag's side can look to create a 2v1 at the back post with Garnacho and Dalot from the right and Shaw and Rashford from the left. And so overall, from an offensive point of view, Ten Hag's United need to be looking to take advantage of Emre's narrow midfield 4, as well as their high back line and their use of the offside trap. And they can do this by getting Rashford and Garnacho into the half spaces where they can then make runs from deeper positions, rather than having them make runs from out wide or from on the shoulder of the last defender, and using them in these positions rather than Bruno Fernandes, who I think should be used in a deeper role to actually create this space for both Garnacho and Rashford in the half spaces. And alongside this, by keeping one or both of United's wide players wide, when the ball is on the opposite side of the pitch, United can then look to use a quick switch of play in order to create an overload down the channel, and isolate the Villa fullback in a 2v1 in order to get into some dangerous crossing positions. So thank you for watching. If you did like that video, you can check out my recent videos on Dalot, Hojlund and Mainu, which will all be linked in the description, and remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get notified when my videos come out, and my Patreon will also be linked in the description if you want to sign up for more content as well.